The Rebbe began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos HaChodesh. Just like every Inyan in Torah the same, with the Inyan that it is Shabbos HaChodesh, it is all like the Torah of the Baal Shem, like the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that we have to take a lesson in Hayra as far as serving the Rebishter and bringing it down into practicality, HaMaisa Hu Ha'ika. And the same would apply to the general thought of Parshas HaChodesh, which is today as well. And it seems like as an introduction the Rebbe went on, that in Shabbos, in general, we find several inyanim, two inyanim. On one hand, we find how Shabbos is mekache v'kaima. Shabbos is something which is set. In other words, it is something which does not depend on us individuals. When Shabbos should fall out, it is something, this is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created the world, that automatically, every week we have a Shabbos. On the other hand, we find in Inyan and Shabbos how the Torah tells us, Sheishes Yomim Taseh Melacha, 6 days a week we are supposed to do work, and it comes to the seventh day, we rest on Shabbos. So we see that Shabbos is sort of like dependent on our schedule. In other words, we do work for 6 days a week, and the Torah tells us this is how a Yid is supposed to feel sich. Sheishis yomim ta'aseh melacha. There's another word the Rebbe mentions where it says in a pasuk, Sheishis yomim te'asa melacha, that the work is done in 6 days. However, not everyone is living up to such a madrege where he has his work done for him. This is already a high madrege. Zacha melachtei nases al yidei acherem. One has to be fortunate so that his work will be done by others. However, the average person is set up in a format of Sheishes Yomim Taseh Melacha. 6 days a week we do Melacha, and then it comes Vayom HaShvi, then it's Tishbais. It comes on Shabbos, we rest. So we have Shabbos in both Madregas. As well, we have the same thing, B'negei Torah, because Torah and Shabbos are very closely associated. So we find in Torah also the same thing. We find in Torah the Madrega, how Torah stands as Shashuyim Lefonav Yisbarech, the Madrega, how Torah is closely associated with Atzmis, with the Rebishtan as part of Atzmis. That is one level in Torah. Then we have the way the Rebishtan gave Torah to Yidden, the way he gave it that Torah should be fulfilled and learned by Ilam Hazah Gashmi. In fact, when we find B'negei Matan Torah, as it is explained at length in Chasidus, there was prior to Matan Torah, there was the mechitze between Elyonim and Tachtonim, between Gashmias and Ruchnias, between Maila and Mata. It came to Matan Torah, the Rebishter had two alternatives, whether to bring Nevroyim up to him, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu should come down here. What did the Rebishter select? Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. The Rebishter came down onto Har Sinai, which shows how Torah is given into Gashmis. How the Rebishter took the whole Inyan of Torah and gave it Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. The Rebishter came from Lamaila down unto Lamata and gave the Torah to the Nevroim here Lamata. So this is B'negei Torah in general. Today that we are reading Parshas HaChodesh and everything is extremely accurate, it is not only there that we read the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, it also stands for the Inyan of Chodesh Meloshen Chidush. Chidush means renewal. What's the pshat? We renew. Exactly, renew. In other words, it's not something which is completely new, something which wasn't in existence before. If we should be talking about an Inyan which wasn't in existence before, then the word Chidush wouldn't be appropriate. Then we would have to use an expression of Bria, Yetzirah, something creating something new totally. However, in this case, we are talking about Chidush, which means a renewal. What's the pshat renewal? Here's an opportune time and a proper time for a Yid to be able to renew and refresh all his inyanim as far as Avodas Hashem. And we see that everything comes in a proper order. Parshas HaChodesh is the last one of the 4 Shabbosim, of the separate 4 Shabbosim which we have. First one is Parshas Shkolim. Parshas Shkolim is we give the Machzis HaShekel, as the pasuk tells us, L'chaper al nafshei seichem. It comes as a forgiveness, and as it's brought in Medrash and a Chazal, forgiveness for what? It's a forgiveness for Chet HaEgel. After that, we come to a higher Madrega. Once we have already been forgiven for the Chet HaEgel, we come to the Madrega of Parshas. What is the next Shabbos that comes after Parshas Shkolim? We come to Parshas Zocher. What's the inyan of Zacha? Zacha is Asher Asa Lecha Amalek. We are to remember what Amalek did to us. So the Rebbe explained today, actually, there is a mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek. Mechiyas Amalek means total erasing of Amalek. So we are talking after this mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek was already fulfilled. And Amalek was totally erased. However, at the same time, we are told that we always have to remember that there is a possibility of an Amalek coming back again. This the Rebbe tied in, Al Tamim Ba'atzmacha Ad Yom Moisach. In other words, a person is never supposed to be confident in oneself to say that he will already be perfect forever. A person always has to be on guard and watch himself that he Chas v'Chalila shouldn't be nichshal again. Memela, this is the inyan of Pashas Zacha, which Zacha is the inyan of Zacha is Asher Asa Lecha Amalek, that we are constantly told to remember that there is a possibility of Amalek getting control of us again, Chas v'Shalom. From that we come to a yet higher madrege. We come to a madrege of Pashas Parah. What's the meaning of Pashas Parah? Pashas Parah is how a Yid is purified that he should be able to enter the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Tameh, he can't go into the Beis HaMikdash. However, naturally we're talking, Rebbe stressed, we're talking in one has gone through already the stage of Parsha Shkolim and Parsha Zachar. We know that there is a klal that to a Baal Tshuva, we never remind the Baal Tshuva of the sins that he did before he did Tshuva. So Memela, it's not the pshat that we're reminding a Yid of avlis that he did before. The only thing is we are telling him to be on guard that he shouldn't come back to the same sinning again. And furthermore, he's rising to a higher level, to such a level of purity, to such a level of tahara, which allows one to enter the Beis HaMikdash. After one has gone through all these three stages of Parsha Shkolim, Pashas Zachar, and after that Pashas Parah, here we come to Pashas HaChodesh, which Pashas HaChodesh is a yet higher madrege. This is the level which calls for a renewal, a total renewal in all the inyanim of Avodas Hashem. As the Rebbe elaborated that there, as Chassidus explains, there are several oifanim, several levels as far as Avodas Hashem. There is a level which Chassidus refers to it as iskafia, which means one gains control of the Yetzer Hara and he holds back the Yetzer Hara. There is a yet higher madrega which is explained in Chassidus, and this is the madrega of ishapcha. Ishapcha meaning that one is successful in turning over the Yetzer Hara totally. Not only that the Yetzer Hara shouldn't interfere him from fulfilling the will of the Rebishter, but more than that, the Yetzer Hara has been turned over to such an extent that not only is he serving the Rebishter with his Yetzer Tov, he's serving the Rebishter with the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara was also turned over to become part and parcel of the Yetzer Tov and be willing to serve the Rebishter, which Chassidus dedicates a lot to these inyanim. But very briefly, this is referred to, this is titled as the Avodah of Iskafia and the Avodah of Ishapcha. And the idea of Pashas HaChodesh is that on all the levels, on the levels of Iskafia, as well as on the level of Ishapcha, and as well as one's work with oneself, and not only how we work with our own self, but how we are supposed to do as our obligation to do with others, and all these levels, Pashas HaChodesh calls for a total renewal, a total chidush in the whole inyan of Avodas Hashem. And here the Rebbe began speaking about the importance of learning Chitas daily. The Rebbe said that there are many, unfortunately, that think that Chitas is something which is for a plain, simple Jew. However, one who is capable of really dwelling into being Mechadish Chidushim and learning in Nigla the Torah, and as well as it comes to a limit of Chassidus, he has a very deep and good understanding, and he will dedicate himself to learn the Hemshech of Taf Reish Ayin Beis. This is a Hemshech from the Rebbe Rashab, which is a very long and in-depth Hemshech of Chassidus, real philosophical Chassidus Hemshech printed in 3 volumes from the Frierdiker Rebbe's father. Rebbe said, one may think Chitas is not for him. He will see to it that others learn Chitas. However, as far as himself, he will really get involved and learn deep in Yonim and Chassidus, the Hemshech of Taf Reish Ayin Beis. Rebbe expressed himself that unfortunately there are people present at the Farbrengen, he says, not only one, says, and he's referring to a person he's looking right at while talking about this, but the Rebbe says he's sorry to, it's unfortunate that there are even more than a minion amongst the participants in the Farbrengen that are not observing the Shiurim of Chitas properly. He says that he'll be talking Beneged the Shir Chitas of today as well as the Shir Chitas of yesterday. And others think that once we're already up to yesterday, so like the expression would go, this is already yesterday's day. Der nächtiger Tag. The expression would go in Yiddish. So yesterday's doesn't have that much chivas to him. And Beneged today's, he also didn't do it yet properly. He says, and when he's asked, why aren't you learning Chitas properly? He says, well, he can't dedicate time to Chitas because he's busy saying Tehillim from Shabbos Mavachim. But when is he asked, is he really saying the Tehillim from Shabbos Mavachim properly? Then the answer there is also no. And the Rebbe urged very strongly how we to see to it that not only to influence others to learn Chitas, but it's our obligation to realize that Chitas is extremely important for each and every one of us, and one shouldn't say that Chitas is not befitting for him and he's up to deeper levels in learning and so forth. On the contrary, Chitas is something which is obligatory on everyone, that everyone should learn daily, on a daily basis, and not leave it for the next day, and so forth, but taki each and every day to learn the proper time, all the 3 shiurim of Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. Then the Rebbe went on, this is so, B'negei Parshas HaChodesh, irrelevant what Shabbos Parshas HaChodesh falls out to be. What Shabbos as far as the Kriya is concerned. Kriyas HaTorah. And if we look carefully in calendars, the Rebbe says, we will notice that Kriyas HaTorah will vary in different years as far as Parshas HaChodesh goes. In other words, not every year we will read the same Kriya in Parshas HaChodesh. Why is this so? The Rebbe goes on. Because each and every year we take a different Torah, a different lesson from Parshas HaChodesh, and together with it, from the particular Kriyas it falls out to be in that year. However, the lesson which we derive each and every year, this is something we are to live with for the years to come as well. In other words, the lesson we will take from Parshas HaChodesh. Like, for example, this year. This year, Parshas HaChodesh falls out in a Sedra when we read Vayakhel-Pekudei. Next year, it may fall out on a different Shabbos. So this lesson, which we get in Avodas Hashem from Parshas Vayakhel-Pekudei, this is something which we have to carry with us for all the years, as well as the lesson which we will get from next year's Sedra, next year's Parshas HaChodesh, the way it will fall out to be. This will also be something which we will have to take with us for all the years to come, and so on. This week, the Sedra is a combination of 2 Sedras, Vayakhel-Pekudei. And the emes is that Parshas HaChodesh, which is read as the maftir of the week Sedra, has a very strong shayches to the Sedra, irrelevant to whatever Sedra it's read. Why? Because normally we see, as we see in Roiv Shabbos Hashana, most Shabbosim of the year, we see that Shvi reads till the end of the Sedra. Whatever is read for Shvi'i, part of it is reread for Maftir. So we see that the Maftir always has a strong shaykhs to the Sedra. The Rebbe says we will find it in the word itself. The word Maftir, Haftoira, Maftirin, as we say in the Haggadah, Maftirin, Acha Pesach, Afikoiman, means whatever comes at the end, dessert-like. So this inyan of Maftir, which though today it is not read in the Sedra, it is read in Parshas Boi, which is Parshas HaChodesh. However, from the mere fact that we titled this Maftir, this in itself is a siman that it is a Maftir on the entire Sedra. So we must say that the Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh has a shaykhs to the entire Sedra. The entire Sedra is Vayakhel-Pekudei. Shabbos, we read both Sedras, Vayakhel and Pekudei. However, the Rebbe goes on, the entire week is called Vayakhel-Pekudei. Obviously, we may say, being that as we learn Chitas, as the week is divided, the first couple days of the week, we learn Parshas Vayakhel. Then it comes Wednesday, Wednesday is the day that combines both Sedres, and we begin learning Parshas Pekudei. Still, we don't find that the first couple days of the week should be called Parshas Vayakhel. Though those days we are also learning only Vayakhel, still those days we learn Vayakhel. Later days we learn Pekudei, but the entire week is called Parshas Vayakhel-Pekudei. The Rebbe goes on, if we look carefully, Vayakhel and Pekudei are two contradictory thoughts. What's the pshat? Vayakhel. Vayakhel Moshe's kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Moshe united, congregated all of Adas Yisrael. So what does the idea of Vayakhel stand for? How Klal Yisrael are united into one. What does Pekudei stand for? Pekudei, Eila Pekudei, HaMishkan, Mishkan Eidos. Pekudei means the count. What's the pshat, the count? And when we count, each and every one stands out individually. That's the whole idea of a count. Now if we're talking how Vayakhel and Pekudei are combined together, here the pshat is, there are two inyanim. There's an inyan of Vayakhel, and there's an inyan of Pekudei. To be more specific, the Rebbe says, in general terms, it may also be defined as the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Torah is one unit, a one. However, mitzvahs, there's an expression, Kol HaTorah inyan echad. However, mitzvahs are referred to as individual parotim. There may be a general approach to mitzvahs, which is a general introduction to all mitzvahs. However, each and every mitzvah has its specific details. What's the pshat when Vayakhel and Pekudei come together, and all this happens in Parshas HaChodesh? Pshat is that in general inyanim that are klolistic inyanim, such as Vayakhel stands for, such as Torah stands for, and as inyanim which are individualized, which this is the thought of Parshas Pekudei, Sayim Vayakhel and Sayim Pekudei, it is required that comes Parshas HaChodesh, we refresh and renew ourselves in all these inyanim. In other words, one shouldn't say, enough that Parshas HaChodesh will call for a renewal in general inyanim. However, talking about specific things and bringing it down into individual broken down pratim, to say that in each and every prat, Parshas HaChodesh should require a renewal, it is not so. Or on the other hand, one will say in certain individual pratim, Parshas HaChodesh will call for a renewal, for re-strengthening, reinforcing. However, talking about the general idea of which Vayakhel stands for, the klolistic inyan of Torah, to say that in that part of Torah should also be required an inyan of ischachus, an inyan of chidush, this is not so. So this is what we have in this year's kviyas, to tell us that as well as in inyanim of isachtus, inyanim which are one nekuda, which this is the idea of Vayakhel, also in the idea of Pekudei, which shows for individual things how inyanim are individualized, which this is the whole idea of Pekudei, of account, comes this Parshas HaChodesh, and Parshas HaChodesh is read as the finalization of both Sedres, coming to tell us that in both inyanim, in all inyanim of a Yid, in all inyanim of Torah, and in all inyanim of mitzvahs, Parshas HaChodesh calls for a total renewal and re-strengthening ourselves as far as all these inyanim. Also, today's date is 25 days in the month of Adar. And 25 days in the month of Adar, so the Mishnah tells us that B'Chaf Hei Ba'Adar, on the 25th day in Adar, the Shulchanois, they would set up, it's a Mishnah, I think it's a Shkolah, they would set up special tables in the Beis HaMikdash because it's already coming to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and as of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the new fund would be used for the bringing of all the karbanis. So this was used for a way that all the Yidden should be able to have an opportunity to bring their contribution for the new fund of the year, which the new year in the Beis HaMikdash as far as karbanis began on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So as of the 25th of Adar, they added extra tables. They added extra shulchanos in the mikdash so that everyone should be able to contribute for the new karbanis, for the new fund of karbanis sibur, which was put into use as of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So today's date has a special significance as well, because this is a day which has a strong shaykhus to the whole idea of Nisan, to the whole idea of HaChodesh HaZalachem. And as the Rebbe went on later in the Farbrengen, Rebbe spoke that today's date is a real special day. What do we find about 25 days in Adar, besides what we just mentioned, the Mishnah? 25 days in Adar is the day that Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, died. Nebuchadnezzar was a king that caused terrible tzaras to Yidden. He was the one that destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and didn't let Yidden build a new Beis HaMikdash. However, on this day, on the day when Nebuchadnezzar died and his son took over, Rebbe said that we find in Chazarah that just like Mara tells us, Mechilta tells us, the greatness of Yitzias Mitzrayim. What's so great about Yitzias Mitzrayim? It is defined that Egypt was so strong and so powerful that Mechilta tells us that afilu eved echad eine yochel levroyach misham. Even one individual slave, it was impossible for him to run away from Mitzrayim. And here an entire nation walked out triumphantly. The same, the Rebbe says, is written about Nebuchadnezzar, that when Nebuchadnezzar put somebody into prison, that person never went out of prison again. Nebuchadnezzar imprisoned Yechoniah Melech Yehuda. On the day that Nebuchadnezzar passed away, died, and his son took over, one of the very first things that his son did, we find in Tanakh, was that he took out Yechoniah Melech Yehuda from prison. And not only did he take him out from prison, but he treated him extremely fine and extremely nice, to such an extent, as it is explained in Tanakh. The Rebbe says that he sent him on a daily basis. He was treating Yechoniah Melech Yehuda with royal meals. He really took care of him in a very fine and a very special way. And this is something, everything is an Inyan Nitzchi. And the Rebbe elaborated in the details that his son, Avil Meroidach, who took over the kingdom after Nebuchadnezzar passed away, being that he wasn't sure that if Nebuchadnezzar really died, because in the life of Nebuchadnezzar he had already gone through that Nebuchadnezzar was turned into a chayah and later turned back into a human being. And Mela, he didn't know perhaps that his father Taka died, but maybe something similar to the fact that just like when he was a chayah, he became back a person, maybe now he may come back again. So to convince himself and convince everyone that his father really died, it is written in Tanakh, what he did was he took his father's body out of the tomb, v'gararu v'nasa, and he was goyer atzmais aviv, he dragged the body of his father on the streets of Bavel, so in order that everybody should be convinced that Nebuchadnezzar really died. What do we see from this? What type of lesson are we supposed to take out of this? Everything that reaches us with a hero, that we are supposed to take a lesson out of this Inyan as well. Here we are talking about a king like Nebuchadnezzar, who put the Yidden into exile, put the Yidden into Golus. However, this shows us that in what type of matzav Yidden are, Yidden always comes to a point when Yidden should never give up hope. And here we see, just like by Nebuchadnezzar, Yidden were very much down, Yidden were very much depressed, and here all of a sudden, the day Nebuchadnezzar died, his son took a completely different attitude to Yidden, to such an extent that he took the Jewish king Yechoniah, who was father imprisoned, he took him out of prison and raised him and treated him extremely well. So in general, Bichlal, we know, as the famous saying of the Rebbe Rashab, that a Yid who went into Golus, only our bodies are in Golus. The Neshama of a Yid never went into Golus. And there is no one that really has any authority upon the Neshama of the Yid, only the Rebishter. And no Goy and no Golus and no Gzeiris can have any rulership and any dictatorship over the Neshama of a Yid. This comes to show us that not only B'negei the Neshama, even B'negei the Guf of a Yid. Here we are standing in a day that reminds us that how bad Chas v'Chalila it was for Yidden, and what type of Goliath Yidden went through. Still, we ought never to give up hope, and there's always an Esinas Mokim for light to come. There's always an Esinas Mokim for Geula to come. As we find that B'negei the Geulas, now we are still in the midst of the month of Adar. And B'negei Adar we find it is not only the days of Purim that we celebrate. the month of the Yontif of Purim is so strong and so powerful that it has an impact on the entire month, as we say in the Megillah, that is the entire month that turned over into Simcha. The Rebbe says we can find out who had a hand, who are the excuse me, who are the ones that led to the Nes of Purim. It is also the descendants of the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So this has also been again the Nes Purim, which is also something which we are celebrating now. And we are celebrating now the Nes of Purim. As the Rebbe added on, as we read in the Megillah, that v'zichrom lo Yosef mizaram, that the Nes Purim will remain constantly with us. The Rebbe says, it refers to a taich from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov teiches, hakoyres ha-Megillah lema'afreya lo yotza. It's a Mishnah Megillah. What's the pshat? Pashat, the pshat is, if one reads the Megillah backwards, he's not Yotze. The Megillah is supposed to be read properly accordingly. However, the Baal Shem Tov teiched, if one reads the Megillah backwards, in other words, meaning that this is something which is an old-time story. It's an old thing. However, it has no relevance and no meaning to us, lo yotza, then we are not fulfilling our obligation for Purim. We have to look at the Megillah and the entire contents of the entire story with the contents of the story of the entire Megillah, that it is extremely meaningful to us nowadays as well. As the Rebbe expressed himself, because the Megillah was read in Tafshim Mem Beis this year in Brooklyn, this is why the Megillah is extremely meaningful to us, and the contents of the Megillah as well. So Mamela, the whole idea of the Megillah, which involved someone, Achashverosh, who was a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar's son. All this comes to remind us that how bad Chas v'Chalila it is for Yidden. Yidden never should give up. And always, this day comes as a reminder that the Rebbeinu will always send Ge'ulasai and will redeem Yidden and make it easier for Yidden and take Yidden totally out of Golas. Enoch Hanamed, the Gemara refers Benegeya, the Nes Purim. There's an expression in Gemara, the Rebbeinu did a Nes. However, akate avde Achashverosh anon. We are still considered slaves to Achashverosh. The Rebbe performed a tremendous miracle. However, the Yidden did not go out of the Golas when it happened. The Yidden still remained as citizens in the country of Achashverosh. So Mamela, it wasn't a total Geula. And what we are really to hope for is for a total Geula, a Geula in the sense, not that we should still remain slaves to Achashverosh or to any other current ruler. A Geula that should take us totally out of Golas. The Rebbe also referred to something which he has spoken about in previous Farbrengens, and questions and correspondence was raised on it. And this has been Egeye Reb Nechemye de Brovner. Now, Reb Nechemye de Brovner was an extremely close disciple of the Alter Rebbe. In fact, in the back of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, there's additions. We know we don't have all the Simonim from the Alter Rebbe, so there are certain Simonim which were written by Reb Nechemye. Reb Nechemye de Brovner, he was a very, extremely big chassid and very, very close to the Alter Rebbe and a very close disciple of his. There is also another sefer from him which is titled Divrei Nechemye, Shalos HaTshuvos. In fact, in some of the Shasen, there's small commentary, small Hagoyes, also from the Divrei Nechemye, from this Reb Nechemye de Brovner. So in a previous Farbrengen, on or about Yud Shvat time, the Rebbe spoke about him, and the Rebbe referred to the fact that this Reb Nechemye de Brovner was born on Tu B'Shvat, Chamishasa B'Shvat, and his Yortzeit was also on Chamishasa B'Shvat. The Rebbe tied it in with what the Gemara tells us, that Tzadikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu memalish neseihem miyoim liyoim, that the Rebbe gives Tzadikim that their life should be, their lifespan on this world should be set in such a way that on the day that they were born, this is the day that they pass away. We find it's very popular. We find it by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the 7th of Adar, as well as he passed away on the 7th of Adar. We also find it Benegei, the Mittler Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son, that he was born on 9 days in the month of Kislev, and this is the day when he passed away also, Tes Kislev, 9 days in the month of Kislev. And here the Rebbe says, obviously, you also find it Benegei Reb Nechemye de Brovner, who was born on Chamishasa B'Shvat and passed away on Chamishasa on Tu B'Shvat. The Rebbe said that when he said it in the Farbrengen, he said that it seems to him that it is that way, and he didn't say it in a definitive way that it is definitely so. Rebbe said that it is various places where it's written about Reb Nechemia de Bravna, it is befeirish written that this is the day that he passed away, and this is the day that he was born. Furthermore, Rebbe says that there is writings of Reb Nechemia de Bravna's son, and Reb Nechemia de Bravna's son was, as the Rebbe explained, definitely knew the day that his father passed away because he was obligated to say Kaddish on that day. So he zicha knew that if his father passed away on Chamishasa B'Shvat, that's the Yotzeit which he held after his father. The Rebbe mentioned incidentally that he thinks that Reb Nechemia de Bravna's son immigrated into the United States. He says, and perhaps there may be people that knew him or heard of him from him living here in America. But getting back to it, the Rebbe says, so if everybody is so confident that Reb Nechemia de Bravna, his Yom Haledes, his day of birth was on the 15th of Shvat, as well as the day that he passed away was on the 15th of Shvat, why, when he mentioned it in the Farbrengen, he mentioned it not in a definite way, that is not definitely so. The Rebbe went on and he said as follows. Explained that he said that Bichlal, in those days, even nowadays, but in those days, whenever it is possible to tie a certain date, popular date especially, to tie this date in, that it has a shaykhs to something, it is always done. For example, if a certain thing would take place on the day of the 14th of Adar, which is Purim, naturally everybody would mention that this is Purim. And any writings that would be regarding this day would always refer to it as the day of Purim. Rabbi went on, Tu B'Shvat is also a day of very strong significance. It's the day of Rosh Hashanah Leilonos, and we know Ki Ha'adam Eitz HaSodeh. And there is a lot which is stressed in Sfarim about the greatness of Tu B'Shvat. Memela, the Rebbe says, if the day that Reb Nechemia de Bravna was born and the day that Reb Nechemia de Bravna passed away would be on this great day of Tu B'Shvat, says the Alter Rebbe, who's the Rebbe of Reb Nechemia de Bravna, keeps on stressing in his writings how the greatness of a Yotzeit, and that whatever a person accomplished throughout his life is being elevated on the day of his Yotzeit. And whatever one accomplishes is considered as fruits, as peiros. So it's extremely appropriate to tie in this subject to the day of him passing away being the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, which is Rosh Hashanah Leilonos. And being, the Rebbe goes ahead, that in all the writings which are written about Reb Nechemia de Bravna, written by his own son as well, they don't make any mention that his Yotzeit is Rosh Hashanah Leilonos, just Tesvav Shvat. So this, the Rebbe says, brings him to doubt to say that the Yotzeit is Takan Tu B'Shvat. And perhaps, he says, those days print wasn't that popular. Before anything was being printed. Prior to that, it was handwritten. And in handwritings, in various handwritings, it is very easy to make an error between a Vav, as a Vav is written, and as a Zayin would be written, very small and very fast. Memela, the Rebbe says, he has an inclination to say that perhaps the date of birth and the date of Petira of Reb Nechemia de Bravna is not on Tu B'Shvat, but it is on Tes Zayin Shvat, on the 16th of Shvat. However, as a result of manuscripts that won't be able to be read properly, when it came into print, it was recorded that his date of birth and his day of Yotzeit is for the 15th of Shvat. But that's why when he mentioned it in the Farbrengen of Tu B'Shvat and referred that Tu B'Shvat is the Yotzeit of Reb Nechemia de Bravna, the Rebbe said he is not definite about it. Perhaps it is perhaps it is the Yotzeit of Reb Nechemia de Bravna, but as he explained at length today, it may not be the 15th of Shvat, it could very well be the 16th of Shvat. The Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe also referred to a Rashi in this week's Sedre, and many times, as we know, the Rebbe learns a Rashi in the Sedre, and there are times when the Rebbe selects a pasuk which obviously would require explanation of Rashi, and for some reason there is no commentary of Rashi whatsoever on this pasuk. And this is in beginning of Pashas Vayakhel, where the Torah tells us, Vayomer Moshe el kol adas b'nei Yisrael leimer, zeh hadavar shetziva Hashem leimer. That Moshe says, this is what the Rebishter has commanded. K'chu mi'itchem truma l'Hashem. K'chu means to take from Yidden truma for the Rebishter. Koil nediv liboy, anyone who is in a div leiv, who is a donator, who is philanthropic, Yiviyeho shall bring a trumas Hashem zav a kesef and a chayshes, as the pasuk goes out and counts out exactly 13 or 15 in yonim which were needed for the erection of the Mishkan. The Rebbe says this is a question which is raised by other meforshim who stand out to be meforshim am pshat. Very famously, the Even Ezra, who is someone who also limits himself to pshat. He right away raises the question, what's the pshat k'chu? There's giving and there's taking. There's kicha and nesina. He right away says that kicha, as the pasuk here uses the expression k'chu, is the contrary to nesina. Nesina means to give, k'chu means to take. Obviously, the pasuk here should have said that the Yidden are to give truma. Why does the pasuk use the expression k'chu? If we are to refer back to the beginning of Parshas Truma, where the pasuk there uses as well the expression v'yikhu li truma, you shall take truma. However, the pasuk there expresses me'eis kol ish. The pasuk goes on. It's a complete sentence. The sentence is complete by v'yikhu li truma. Daber al bnei Yisrael, talk to the Yidden. V'yikhu li truma, they shall take truma. Me'eis kol ish asher yidvenu li, from anyone who will volunteer and be willing to give tikhu es truma, so you shall take the truma. There it is more befitting to use the expression of v'yikhu, of kicha, because the pasuk is laid out into a full sentence, v'yikhu li truma me'eis kol ish, from every person. However, here, k'chu me'itchem truma, take from them truma. What's the expression k'chu? The pasuk should have used the expression nesina, that the Yidden should give truma. Rebbe goes on, there's a medrash, and the medrash is called medrash lekach toiv, and this is, though it is a medrash, the Rebbe says, however, it is a medrash which is very, very closely to pshat. And this medrash says that kicha and nesina could be used for the same idea. So we already see that the medrash learns the opposite as the Even Ezra. A second, please. However, Rashi should have at least commented something on this question. We see it's something which involves an opinion from the Medrash. It arouses a contrary opinion from the Even Ezra. And Rashi bypasses, learns with the 5-year-old Chumash, and Rashi doesn't comment anything on the pshat of K'chu me'itchem truma. Rebbe mentioned, it wasn't here, it was place Farbrengen, the Rebbe mentioned also there is a mechilte. Mechilte is medrashim anshe mois. The Rebbe said that he got a letter from somebody, that the person asked the Rebbe to help him. The party wrote to the Rebbe that he has a set of chumashim with the mechilte printed in the chumash. However, the mechilte begins only from Parshas Boi, and he's missing mechilte on Shmois and Va'era. So, being like Rebbe used the expression, being that he knows the Rebbe as a baki, perhaps the Rebbe could help him and tell him where he can find mechilte on Shmois and Va'era. Rebbe said the response is very obvious. For whatever reason, there is no mechilte on Shmois and Va'era. Mechilte first begins, the Medrash, which is also from Tanoim, begins as of Parshas Boi. Prior to that, there's no mechilte. However, getting back here to the Rashi, the Rebbe learns as follows. Rebbe learns, if we look carefully, we will see that there's a tremendous difference between the psukim in Vayakhel as opposed to the psukim in Parshas Truma. In Parshas Truma, the pasuk says, Daber el bnei Yisrael, the Rebbe told Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'yikhu li truma. From whom? Me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu libay. But whom did the Rebbe tell him to address? Daber el bnei Yisrael. If we turn here to Parshas Vayakhel, Moshe is talking differently. Vayomer Moshe el kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Moshe is addressing not only adas b'nei Yisrael, kol adas b'nei Yisrael. We know every word in Chumash is extremely accurate. So we must say that there is a difference whether the pasuk uses the expression adas b'nei Yisrael as opposed to kol adas b'nei Yisrael. In other words, kol means a larger segment of Klal Yisrael. Perhaps if we would be talking adas b'nei Yisrael, would be referring to male only, to men only. When the pasuk says that Moshe congregated kol adas b'nei Yisrael, it means that Moshe congregated not only the men, but Moshe congregated men, women, and children, and addressed to all of them the great importance. Zeh hadavar shatziva Hashem leim. What did the Rebbe say? K'chu me'itchem truma l'Hashem. So the Rebbe goes on. If we look carefully, this pasuk Hey, talks about two types of contributions to the Mishkan. Firstly, Moshe is instructing the Gaboyim. He's talking to the Gaboy Tzedakah, to those who were the elders. And we know that amongst Klal Yisrael there were Sorei Alofim, Sorei Meyos, Sorei Asoreis. There were various appointees. So Moshe Rabbeinu is addressing himself to these appointees, and he's telling them, K'chu me'itchem truma. Go ahead, and collect truma from the Yid. Go out and solicit for funds that are needed in order to erect the Mishkan. And it doesn't apply only to money funds. It also means all the 13 inyanim which are figured out in the pasuk. Tcheles, Argomon, Telah, Shoni, Sheish, V'izim, everything. All these inyanim, Moshe is instructing those who were in charge of Klal Yisrael, all these appointees, that they should go out and raise these things. Vaita Moshe is addressing himself, Koil Nediv Liboy. However, the one who is an Nediv Leiv, the one who is a real philanthropic person and has a real feeling for the Mishkan, to him there's no need to go to. Yiviyas Trumas Hashem. He will come by himself without anyone approaching him even, and come ahead and come forward and bring for Trumas Hashem. So Mamela, when we read Pashas Truma, Moshe did not address himself that way. And there he only spoke El Adas B'nei Yisrael. And here Moshe is talking to Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, and he says, Zeh hadavar shatziva Hashem. Where do we find that the Rebishter told him to congregate all of Adas B'nei Yisrael? We find only that the Rebishter told him to speak to Adas B'nei Yisrael, not to Kol. The Rebbe says if we look carefully through Chumash, we will find many inyanim that it is not repeated twice. In other words, it is not repeated as the Rebishter is telling Moshe exactly what to do. And the way Moshe followed exactly the Rebishter's instruction, there is no need for it to be repeated twice. The Rebbe says even in this week's Seder in Pashas Vayakhel-Pekudei, we also find such inyan. So Mamela, in Pashas Truma we find how the Rebishter instructed Moshe in general. Daber el b'nei Yisrael. Go and talk to b'nei Yisrael. V'yikru li truma. There the Rebishter is talking. On what level? On the level where it is needed for solicitors. There is a need that the appointees, that the Sarim amongst the Yidden, should go out and raise funds in order to be able to erect the Mishkan. Here in Pashas Vayakhel, Moshe congregated whom? Everyone. Why everyone? Because here Moshe Rabbeinu spoke not only that how the Sorei Alofim and Sorei Asoreis, the appointees amongst Klal Yisrael, should go out and raise the inyanim that are needed for the Mishkan. Here Moshe went a step further and expressed himself that the one who is really philanthropic and has a real feeling for the Mishkan should come across and volunteer without even being solicited for and bring his contribution for the Mishkan. It is customary that when one comes to the home to solicit for a donation, to ask for a donation, whom does he approach? He approaches the head of the household, approaches the husband. Naturally, later, the wife could get involved. Even al pi halacha it is so. Because a major contribution is brought in Shulchan Aruch that small contributions women could give on their own. However, something which stands for a larger contribution, a woman has to come on to the reshus of her husband to be able to give it. Memela, when we are talking in Pashas Truma, Moshe congregated Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yikru li Truma. If we are talking about those that have to go out and collect the funds for Truma, we are talking el b'nei Yisrael only. Because this is how the usual setup would be, that if when we send out the appointees to raise the funds for the Mishkan, they would address themselves to the heads of the household. Memela, this is an inyan which is negeya only to generally Bnei Yisrael. Here Moshe Rabbeinu is talking not only about those that are going out to raise the funds. He is talking an inyan which has a shaykhs to everyone. Kol adas Bnei Yisrael. What's the pshat Kol adas Bnei Yisrael? Not only men, but women as well. Because women were able to volunteer on their own and bring contributions towards Hakamas HaMishkan. And what do we find? We read in this week's Sedra, we go weiter, Vayavoyu ha'anoshim al anoshim. Who are the ones that really stood out in volunteering contributions towards the Mishkan? It was the women more than the men. As Rashi tells us, and as Chazal say, B'negei this pasuk, Vayavayu ha'anoshim al anoshim. Here the Rebbe said, here we see the greatness of Neshei Yisrael. How great the Jewish woman is. Because we are just past Esther, which is the Yontav of Purim. The Rebbe says it's very interesting. We refer to the Megillah as Megillas Esther. Actually, Mordechai also played a role in the Megillah. Why wasn't the Megillah titled Megillas Mordechai ve'Esther? If Esther played a very great role, let us at least title the Megillah Megillas Esther u'Mordechai. No, we don't find it that way. The Megillah carries the title Megillas Esther. Rabbi explained why is this so. Because here we see how great and outstanding the koyach of the Jewish woman goes. To such a great extent that we refer to it, the Megillah, which is a very great nest which took place by Yidden, we refer to the Megillah as Megillas Esther. The Rebbe said today is Shabbos Mevachim of the month of Nisan. Shabbos Mevachim of the month of Nisan. In the month of Nisan, on the 13th day of the month, is the Yotzeit of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe referred to a story which was related by the Frierdiker Rebbe that involves the Tzemach Tzedek and his Rebbetzin. That the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin used to say a lot of Tillim. And she once complained to her sons that she's saying that much Tillim, and she's still not successful in learning Tillim by heart. So some of her children responded to her, you know why it is so? Because each time you say it with different mistakes. She felt very bad. She felt very bad about it. So she complained to her husband, to the Tzemach Tzedek, that this is what she was told by her sons. So Tzemach Tzedek called in his children, and he criticized them very strongly for talking such a way to their mother. And he told his children. We know that the Tzemach Tzedek was involved very strongly in Peterburg with various gezeiras from the Tsar who wanted to come out very strongly against Jewish education, and the Tzemach Tzedek had many house arrests. He was arrested many times. He was arrested in the house in Peterburg, that he wasn't allowed to leave the quarters where he stood. So the Tzemach Tzedek told his children that it is in the schus of their mother, his Rebbetzin, that he was released all of these times from prison. The Mela, they shouldn't just make away with the hand. The Tillim of the mother, the Tillim of their mother is something which accomplishes tremendous inyan. The Rebbe went on and really elaborated on it. He said, we're talking here about somebody in the caliber of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was involved in extremely great inyanim that are negeya to Klal Yisrael. Decrees that may come out to be dreadful to Chinuch of Yalda Yisrael, which is something extremely important. At the same time, the Tzemach Tzedek was confronted with the Tsar, who we know that amongst various rulers, amongst Goyim, he is noted for his great hatred to Yidden. So Tzemach Tzedek was doing real tremendous things. And at the same time, whose Tillim helped him? The Tillim of his Rebbetzin. So here we have to realize, the Rebbe says, how great and how tremendous it is the power, the koyach of an Isha b'Yisrael. The Rebbe went on and said, though in davening, the Rebbe said, it is very important to be able to daven accordingly, to daven without mistakes, without errors, and to be able to say Ivra and Siddur properly as Siddur should be said. However, b'negei Tillim, it is not that gefährlich, and especially when we're talking about an Isha b'Yisrael, who the obligation and the tafkid of a Jewish of a Jewish wife is not to learn diktuk and to be able to know when a shvana and a shvanoch, how to be able to pronounce the words perfectly. The obligation of a Jewish woman is to be able to raise a house of children and to be able to say Tillim and help out her husband in his work, which, as the case was by the Tzemach Tzedek, her Tillim was extremely helpful. And the Rebbe says if we want to see what type of children she raised, Rebbe referred that there's in times of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the first years here in the United States, there was a monthly which was published, which was called Hakriya V'Hakdusha. In the Hakriya V'Hakdusha, there are certain writings by the Frierdiker Rebbe himself. And in these monthlies, in the Hakriya V'Hakdusha, there are many referrals to the Tzemach Tzedek's sons. And the Tzemach Tzedek's sons, all of the Tzemach Tzedek had 6 sons. To all of them, the Frierdiker Rebbe refers with a tremendous amount of kavod and tremendous amount of respect, referring to all of them with a title of Harav HaTzadik. So we see what type of children she raised. So this really shows us the great koyach that the Rebbe has given to Neshei Yisrael, and the great powers which they were given, which we find B'Negeya Esther HaMalka. As well, we find the same thing B'Negeya the Tzemach Tzedek's Rebbetzin, which just comes to show us in general the lesson we can derive from this, how important the role of a Jewish woman is. The Rebbe also urged in today's Farbrengen that we should not forget about the great importance of the Mivtzoyim, all of the Mivtzoyim in general, and particularly these Mivtzoyim which are most important now. Most important now is the inyan of Mivtza Matzah, to see to it that every Yid has hand matzah to the Seder, as well as Mois Chitim, which is something of extreme importance, to see to it that every family has their needs, has the means to be able to provide all the needs for Yontif, and wherever assistance is needed, that we should go out and give this assistance and so forth. The Rebbe referred to it as well from the pasuk which we are learning. We find that Kol Nediv Libo Yiviyas Tchumas Hashem. So from here we see that one who is a Nediv Leiv, one who's really philanthropic, he does not wait till he's called on to be able to be active in Mivtzoyim, and be active in Mois Chitim, and be active in all the inyanim needed, but on the contrary, he's a Nediv Leiv, so he goes out even before he's called on, and is active in Mivtzoyim, and sees to it that Yidden have the Kazayis Matzah of a hand Shmura Matzah, at least for the Seder, and at least for the Kazayis Matzah, as we know that the Rebbe wants that every Yid should, all participants in the Sedarim, should be able to have hand Shmura Matzah, at least a piece of hand Shmura Matzah for the evening of the Seder, for the Kazayis Matzah, as well as the great importance of Mois Chitim, which means that every family should be able to have the full need to be able to celebrate the Yontif properly. And the Rebbe also referred that we do not forget about the Mivtza Sefer Torah, to see to it that every Yid has a letter in the Sefer Torah. And a letter in the Sefer Torah is something which, as the Rebbe keeps on stressing, it is very meaningful and very important. Here the Rebbe mentioned that we find that great Gedolei Yisrael, just to mention one of them, the Rasag, Rabbeinu Sadye Goen, makes a tremendous issue of every single letter in the Torah. Rabbeinu Sadye Goen counted all the letters in the Torah. Not only did he count all the letters, the Rebbe says we find in the writings of Rabbeinu Sadye Goen that he counted all the aleph and all the beis and so forth. So to count letters in general is something which is tremendously time-consuming. But to count each and every letter is yet more time-consuming. And still we see that a person of the caliber of Reb Sadye Goen took time out of his great and busy schedule, and we're talking about one of the Ge'ainim, and counted all the letters in the Torah. And to such an extent that he counted them individually. So from here we see how meaningful each and every ois in the Sefer Torah is. So the Rebbe again alerted that we should see to it that each and every Yid should have an ois in the Sefer Torah. While talking about Reb Sadye Goen, Rebbe says that the Baal Shem Tov many times refers to Reb Sadye Goen. We find in the writings of the Baal Shem Tov, though the writings of the Baal Shem Tov were not written by the Baal Shem Tov himself, Rebbe says the Alter Rebbe writes that all the Torahs of the Baal Shem Tov were recorded by the Baal Shem Tov's Talmidim. But at the same time, they bring what the Baal Shem Tov said, that the Baal Shem Tov referred many, many times to Reb Sadye Goen. The Rebbe said that he once saw in a Polish Sefer that the Baal Shem Tov had the neshama of Reb Sadye Goen. The Rebbe says he never heard it from the Frierdiker Rebbe. and he never saw it elsewhere, but it is a geschmackige inyan to say so. Hagam, he's not sure, the Rebbe says, if it is so or not, but the fact in itself, it's brought in a sefer. And the Polish sefer means Chabad in Lubavitch. When we refer, there's Chabad Hasidus, then there is Polish Hasidus. In other words, those Hasidic dynasties who flourished in Poland, primarily Ger, Kotsk, and so forth. The Rebbe says that he saw it in one of those Svarim. And here the Rebbe said that in Lubavitcher dictionary, when you want to refer to Lubavitcher Hasidim, we refer to them as Chabad. That's Lubavitcher teachings. When you want to refer to these Polish Hasidim, you refer to them as Chagas Hasidim. In other words, there's Chabad, which is Chochmah Bina Das, Chagas, which is more an expression of Midas, as opposed to the intellect which Chabad teaches. The Rebbe says that he got a letter from someone telling that a certain Lubavitcher, one who's supposedly supposed to represent Lubavitch very strongly, quoted from Sifrei Chagas, quoted from Polish Svar. It seems like whoever wrote this to the Rebbe wrote it in the sense of a complaint that somebody who is Lubavitch and is following the teachings of Chabad should not look into other Svarim, should not quote Svarim from Polish Rebbes. And he wrote to the Rebbe this complaint, and as the Rebbe expressed himself, today used the expression, Chagas. They quote this person with a knowledge of Sifrei Chagas. Polish Chassidus Bechlal stresses more the Maisa, stresses more action. In other words, does not stress that much the intellect of as Chabad does. The Rebbe says that he responded to this person. He responded to him, obviously, he says every person who even we realize the greatness of Chabad, we realize the greatness of the intellect, but at the same time, everybody wants to be complete, not only with Chabad, but with Yadayim as well. Everybody wants to have hands. Chas v'chalila, there's no person who will say that he's extremely proud of Chabad to such an extent that he doesn't want no hands, chas v'shalom. A person who's that way is a Balmum. The Rebbe says, so he responded to this person. He's definitely proud, agreeing with the fact that one must have hands as well, and cannot satisfy himself with the fact that he has his mind, his Chabad. So the Rebbe says at the same time, we are not to underestimate the greatness of the Polish Chassidus. Enochanam, it stands for Chagas, but however, one cannot survive Chabad only. There's an inyan of Chagas, which this is what the Rebbe referred to. The Rebbe said it as he got involved, mentioning that he found in a Polish Sefer that the Baal Shem Tov had the neshama of Reb Sadia Gaon. But however, it'll be, the Rebbe says, still we find that the Baal Shem Tov had a very warm reaction to Reb Sadia Gaon. So Mamela, we must say that this inyan, how Reb Sadia Gaon spent a lot of his time, obviously, to be able to count all the letters and all the alifs and bases in the Torah, this shows how each and every ois is extremely chashiv. Rebbe also said that towards the end of the Farbrengen that we're talking before Pesach, but it is extremely important to see to it that before Pesach another gathering of children should take place. He says, however, the details, how to set it up, he's not getting involved, whether to make it in one general place or to have it in smaller, at various places, but being that it'll be at various places, it will be able to involve more children in smaller groups, or to have it in one central place and bring children from many places to this central point. He says this is irrelevant, but the fact is to see to it that before Pesach to congregate children and make another gathering of Tzivos Hashem. And by doing this, the Rebbe says, we may be zeiche to see to it that all Jewish children will fit into the category of Chacham. He says, one may ask a question. We talk in the Haggadah, we talk about other categories also. In the Haggadah we enlist 3 other categories besides the category of Chacham. Rabbi said, so Pesach is a time of asking questions. So whoever will ask this question will have another question and will ask it. But just like we give answers to other questions, we will give an answer to this question as well. But let our hope and goal be to see to it that all Jewish children should be classified as Chachamim. The Rebbe went on wishing the Ksiva v'Chasim Taiva. I'm sorry, a kosher, excuse me. Rebbe went on wishing.
That's from all the Yanim about the Rosh Hashanah. And
that's right.
So you should mention that. Yes. Chalchei Yavada is analogous according to the data.
That's right. Avram is correcting me. And the Rebbe went on wishing a kosher and freilich on Pesach, and Benegei Pesach we have to come on that not only the yontif in itself should be a kosher and freilich, but Pesach is a yontif that involves many, many preparations. So Rebbe wished that all the preparations for the yontif of Pesach should also come on very easy and very happily. And the Rebbe referred that there's an expression in the Ramah at the very end of the Chelik Orach, right after he discusses all the halachas of Purim, he expresses himself. These are the last words of the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. He expresses himself, V'toiv leiv mishta tomid, that the best thing is that a person should be able to always be in a position of joy and festivity. So Mamela coming from the Yontif of Purim, and right after Purim going into the Yontif of Pesach, Rabbi uses the expression Mismach Geula LaGeula, bringing close one Geula to the other. This should lead to the ultimate Geula of Kimeitzeis Cham Eretz Mitzrayim Arenu Neflo, is the ultimate Geula by Mashiach Tzidkenu.